had used the term the path of least resistance. There's
Yes.
absolutely nothing wrong with that.
No. It's just that the path of least it becomes a bit counterintuitive, which is why most people don't think about it when the path of least resistance literally might take you halfway around the world before you
Yeah.
come back home again, because
Right.
that's not something you expect. And I've met founders, I've worked with founders who they have honed in on a very specific problem and that they're trying to solve. And the problem is quite intuitive. You can explain it to anyone in 3 seconds flat. And if you explain it, anyone would say, yes, I have that problem. Can you help me with it?
Mm.
But then when they get to the execution part, you have these kinds of, call it local geographic dynamics, cultural dynamics, ethnic dynamics, whatever the filter is. And somehow that intuitive solution to the intuitive problem just hits a wall for completely unintuitive and unrelated reasons.
Hmm.
Welcome to the Resilient Minds podcast, stories of grit, growth, and success. On this show, we focus on the real stories behind the success, the struggles, the resilience, and the courage it took to keep moving forward even when times got tough. My goal is to provide you with stories of hope and transformation, showing that no matter the challenges, there is a way forward, and you can find it. This is Resilient Minds.
Hey, I'm your host, Dr. Campbell, and I'm here with Eugene Theodore, and he is a storyteller who bridges strategy with business execution. And me as a founder, like I've had business failures. They're such wonderful lessons, right? Like they feel horrible, but to have somebody who can help you strategize and execute at the same time, because we were talking before we hopped on the show, there's some business strategists out there that really don't know how to help implement a lot of these strategies, and he helps with both. So thank you so much, Eugene, for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Can you tell us in your own words, what is it exactly that you do for business owners?
Sure. Um, so as you said, I'm a storyteller, but I need to give a unique definition of what storytelling is. So at the moment, at an industry level, it's kind of used as the magic mushroom sauce to say, we take something, we market it or we advertise it, and storytelling is this kind of glitzy add-on that somehow helps it connect with the audience in a better way than before. For
Mhm.
me, storytelling, and if you sort of look at the history of what a story is, it's really looking at the full narrative arc of a business, of a person, whatever you're looking at. So, what is the beginning, the middle, the end? The who, the what, the how. So, if I'm looking at a business, it could be a startup, it could be a Fortune 500. The three things that I'm trying to understand are who has started this business and why. What is their personal investment in it? What is the product or service that they're developing and who is it for? And then, of course, how do we, going back to the execution piece, how do we then contact that audience, connect with that audience, get them to understand why the solution you've built is the right solution for them? So
Mhm.
that to me is the full story. It's not just the selling piece at the very end.
Right. I love how you put that together because people buy stories. They want to be connected. And if they can resonate with that, then you really don't have to do any like air quotes selling because you're just
Exactly.
connecting with somebody and the story naturally brings them in, and through
Yeah.
human connection you make offers and they say yes,
Yes,
right? It
of
just
course.
happens so much more fluidly.
And fluidly, authentically, and you create that space for the audience, the customer, the end user to actually find themselves in the product or the solution that you're offering. So it's less of a hard sell, going back to selling, but it's less also you're speaking the same language because you've already done the research, you've understood who they are and what they need, and you're literally just presenting it to them saying, listen, I know you asked for this, here it is. I don't have to say anything else.
Yeah, because then you naturally get loyalty too when it's really for them because
Yeah.
they resonate with it. I
Yeah.
could see that. That's beautiful. What got you into this work?
Um, a very crooked path, to be honest. So I started off as a photojournalist 25 years ago. That got me again accidentally into the corporate world simply because I was doing a creative fashion shoot for a client. They saw the creativity. They wanted to hire me in-house to do creative, but once I got into the kind of the machine, again, I started seeing the discrepancies between, yes, it's nice to create wonderful, beautiful adverts and advertising and these kinds of go-to-market strategies, But if the foundations of the business or the brand are lacking or misconnected or disconnected from that end user, that no matter how good you might try and create that piece of advertising, it simply won't connect. What we were just saying. So I spent several years in doing market research, consumer interviews, behavioral psychology, and in that space, that's where I sort of learned this sort of three-part system: understanding what it is the business wants, understanding what the consumer or end user wants, and then trying to bridge the two things in between.
Right. So you saw the gap and you decided to go off on your own and create your business to be able to implement what you saw was missing from the industry.
I didn't, when I started the journey, I didn't think I would have to go off and start my own business to do this, because I was sort of within the big corporate machine saying, whenever I'd have these kinds of conversations, to me, it was a given, right? You know what you want to do, you know what the consumer wants you to do. So why aren't you just naturally, intuitively doing it? And yet the gap persisted. And there's very many reasons for that. There's shareholder differences, there's corporate CEO differences, there's different departments, functions. Each one has their own sub agenda, but at the end of the day, it all translates into a broken promise to the consumer. And I was always, if you work in the market research department of a company, your kind of air quotes subtitle is you're the voice of the consumer, right? You're the representative of the consumer's needs and thoughts and thinking in the company. You're their advocate. So the best way I could be their advocate eventually was for me to leave the corporate world and try and intervene on a case-by-case basis or on a client-by-client basis.
Right. So you make sure people who are purchasing actually get what they want.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
That they're
So then
heard.
that makes, because if you actually give the consumer exactly what they're wanting instead of what you think they want or what you think they need, then you're
or
filling.
simply what you want to force on them, which also happens.
Right. And I find that too from a lot of people who are doing actual selling. They're trying to come in, they're a little bit impulsive, a little bit headstrong, don't really listen very well, and
Yep.
they just tend to think that they know, so they don't hear, right? And then they have a lot of unhappy customers. And so
Or
what I
no customers.
found, or no customers, yeah, there's always that. What I found is it's always a balance too, because if you know your client better than they know themselves, you're listening for what they want, and you're balancing that with a hidden subconscious sometimes need that they don't know that they're aware of. So when you bring it to light and you're like, well, would this go well with that? Right.
So
Because
if I can,
I deal with people on the subconscious level too. And I'm like, oh crap. Well, if you know that they need something and you're trying to force it on them, but they don't even know yet, like there is that balance, there's that conversation. And I think that's where a deeper sense of trust comes from.
and I'd actually like to pick up on your terminology, that kind of the hidden subconscious, or let's say the unrealized consciousness. Whether it's a startup or again a 200-year-old established company, I find that the majority reason, or rather the singular reason, that something isn't working, and then the reason that I get called in, is because of that subconscious piece. Now, subconscious at a company level or a corporate level, what does that mean? It means that in that three-part story that I told you, the who you are, the what you're building, and how do you connect with the consumer, it's the who you are piece. And if you're a business, you could say, well, especially if you're a 100, 200, 300-year-old business, you have PowerPoints and decks and videos supposedly telling you who you are. But every team that enters the company, every leadership team that takes over, they have to add their own version. They have to add their own interpretation. And that translation doesn't always happen as a conscious exercise. They inherit something, they assume they're supposed to continue it, they do it their way without realizing what the difference is. So you have that disconnect. And it actually takes a conscientious exercise to say, okay, now that I'm inheriting something or being given something or something's being transferred to me, how would I do it naturally? How should I do it? And is there a disconnect between, the brand heritage, the business heritage, and my own heritage and my own way of thinking? And that's where a lot of leadership teams or founders, that's where they stumble. They get focused on the product and the service. And if they're execution minded, hopefully then they also focus on the consumer and trying to translate the two. But if their own foundations aren't solid, then you have a problem.
Right. Your light went off. I can still see your face,
Sorry.
but
I'll see if I can add a little bit. There we go.
perfect. Okay. So what I was thinking when you were talking about that is I'm a big fan of energy work. Like energy psychology is my jam. It's so cool to understand how it works with our psychology in terms of our human dynamics and our neuroscience because it affects us internally, right?
Hmm?
But when you're talking about a business culture, what you're saying is the individual themselves who comes in, they're adjusting the culture, whether they intentionally are doing it or not, or whether they're even aware of it.
Well, we all create ripple effects in our environment. And,
Right.
if it's you and your family, that's a limited impact. But if it's you on a company and it's a global company and it's $1 billion company and you're trying to sell, a million things to 10 million people, the ripple effects obviously have a much bigger consequences. But so does the failure to recognize if those ripple effects are working or not. So that's why I said there is that conscientious harmonization effort that needs to happen,
Right.
which doesn't always, because it's literally CEO retired today, new CEO takes over tomorrow, and it's
Right.
as quick as that. And the new CEO, for the most part, they get given the playbook, the handbook, if they have something radical that they want to do. And again, even at the startup level, the founder level, it's not that one founder leaves, the other founder comes on, but every time they go through another milestone of the startup journey, right? So I built it, now I need to test it, now I need to scale it, now I need to IPO it. Each one of these stages along the journey actually requires a fundamental rethink and reevaluation of who you are, if what you've done so far has had an impact on you. Have you changed, right? If you've been
Yeah.
doing something for 5 years conscientiously, constantly, you're not a robot. You haven't done it neutrally, from afar. There has been feedback on you. Now that you've reached the next level, is the newer you able to handle it? Is the newer you, does the newer you
Mm.
want to take it to the next level? Because sometimes, again, we just sort of get on the train and the train just sort of runs away with us.
Yeah. So what you're talking about is you transforming with the business.
Yes, it's a mutual feedback loop, or at least it should be a mutual feedback loop. The point is to be
Yeah.
consciously aware of that.
Right. And if you're not, you're screwed.
Yeah.
So when it comes to you and your own personal story, what was the biggest transformation that you went through as that feedback loop with your professional growth?
There were probably two distinct points. The first one was what we already talked about, the kind of the transition from the corporate world to my own independent kind of startup agency. And then the second one was how that agency transformed. So from the first point, it was that realization that there was a system that I was working in. I could see that there were improvements needed. Others could also see improvements were needed, people who were much more senior than I. But again, they had different interests or different reasons why they weren't changing things. And I found myself increasingly at odds with that system. So I found myself, I think the very last year I was in there, I was in the company, I found myself in very many positions where I was, for example, actively siding. I was doing what I was supposed to do. I was actively siding with the consumer, but in so doing, I was killing business ideas and I was going against the grain, because I said,
Yeah.
you know, if you want me to be the advocate, I understand the business need. I understand your business need, but that your business need will simply not harmonize with the end consumer. I'm very happy to translate what they need into a new business need or something else that we can do. But just because, you have some project that has sat in an Excel sheet for 5 years and you're just sort of ticking the boxes until completion, that doesn't mean that it's going to work. And we've actually seen that it's going to work. And I was tired of having that repetitive conversation.
Yeah.
So when two of my mentors left, I left with them. I said, I'm going to go do my own thing. And that was kind of that first inflection point where the feedback loop finally reached that kind of tipping point. And I said, I can either sort of stay here, do what a lot of other people are doing, and ignoring the stimulus and
Yeah.
just continue doing this, and we'll see where I am 10 years from now, 20 years from now. Or I can make the jump and say, listen, if I really want to be true to what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, then I will make that jump and try and help the people that I'm coming across, whether it's in a business context, a social context, a charity context, whatever.
Well, I mean, that could be kind of scary too, because you could have done the safer thing, right? Being an employee sometimes is safer, keeping your mouth shut, doing what you're told, but you took the risk, you made the leap. Was it was it lucrative right off the get-go, or was it kind of rocky for you?
So I'll precede that with a very short anecdote. So when I left my first corporate job, I was only 26, 27. And when I told my parents, they kind of looked, they were the generation where, you graduated from school, you got a job, and for the most part, that was your job for life, right? You had a 30, 40-year career. You could do that back then. Now, I don't think any company will hold a single employee for 30, 40 years. But, you know, at the time when they saw me get my first job, they're like, that's a company that you can retire from, right? And
Yeah.
here I was 4 or 5 years in saying, sayonara, I'm out.
Mhm.
I'm going to go do something else. So you can imagine that shock. The thing was, for me, it was there was, I was still young enough to say, listen, there's novelty. There's other places I can go. There's other things I can learn. I mean, I'm not quitting the job to travel the world for 16 years. I'm quitting this job to see what other capabilities I can build in myself, potentially find other opportunities, whether they're part-time, full-time, freelance, whatever. So I had that kind of mindset. Now, to your question about was it lucrative or how lucrative did it get in the beginning, there were a few things which I didn't know that I didn't know. One of those being that the environment I was in, let's say, wasn't very pro entrepreneurship. What do
Mm.
I mean? It was a kind of environment where you had to kind of be in existence for a certain number of years before they'd even say hi to you, right? They wanted to know that you were part of the furniture, that you weren't a fly by night, you know, independent, or you're going to offer a service today but not be around tomorrow to follow up, right? So it was that kind of culture where, okay, if this person lasts 5 years, 10 years, we'll say hi. If he lasts beyond 10 years, we'll walk into the store and see what he does. If he lasts 20 years, we'll finally start doing business. So I found myself very quickly in the position where I lived was not where I worked. I was constantly traveling because I had to go and find the projects and the clients anywhere else except where I was based.
Mm.
Now I'm based in Europe, so you can hop on a plane in an hour. You're in another capital city of another country, so it's not like completely unmanageable.
Yeah.
But I think for those first 10 years, 95, if not 99% of all my work was anywhere except where I lived.
I really appreciate you saying that because years ago, after I had a big business failure, business lesson, let's reframe that, right? I went back and I had lunch with a few friends of mine, and I had already kind of moved on. I had tried to recover financially. I was still recovering emotionally from it. And they told me at lunch, we're glad that you left and closed that business because this
Hmm.
small town wasn't ready for you. And I'm thinking, what do you mean? They had to explain it to me because I couldn't see it. I needed to be in a global setting, like you had seen, like we need to remove ourselves from that environment. Sometimes we see things, like you said, with that corporate job, you saw things and you tried to implement things, but the culture, the environment, sometimes our society is literally working against us. And if we stay and we're trying to make that change, sometimes it's hurting us more and
Yep.
removing ourselves and trying to bring that service to someone or something else that can appreciate it or can see it better. It's not so much, somebody had used the term the path of least resistance. There's
Yes.
absolutely nothing wrong with that.
No. It's just that the path of least it becomes a bit counterintuitive, which is why most people don't think about it. When the path of least resistance literally might take you halfway around the world before you
Yeah.
come back home again, because
Right.
that's not something you expect. And I've met founders, I've worked with founders who they have honed in on a very specific problem and that they're trying to solve. And the problem is quite intuitive. You can explain it to anyone in 3 seconds flat. And if you explain it, anyone would say, yes, I have that problem. Can you help me with it?
Mm.
But then when they get to the execution part, you have these kinds of, call it local geographic dynamics, cultural dynamics, ethnic dynamics, whatever the filter is. And somehow that intuitive solution to the intuitive problem just hits a wall for completely unintuitive and unrelated reasons.
Mm.
And you're sitting there as a founder and you're saying, but I asked, they answered positive, they validated it, I got great feedback, but now it's yeah, I love your solution, but I'll come to you 10 years from now when I know you're part of the furniture. And that those two things, as a founder, as a starting, as a business owner, you just can't wrap your head around it. At some point, your head just explodes and you have no idea why it is that way. And as you said, you can either then pick up sticks and go somewhere else, or try and find some kind of patchwork solution, or close up shop and say, you know what,
Mm.
not right here, not right now. Let's find some other solution.
That's a good point too. And that kind of goes with what you were saying about transformation. Sometimes saying right now is not the best time. Maybe they're not ready for it. And if you're not ready to remove yourself and go to the people who are ready, because you do have to transform. There's a whole identity shift with moving out of your environment that you're comfortable with and that you know, to become the person to be able to fulfill this. If it's not the best time for you, that's also okay, right? Because
Of course.
there's that whole transformation, and it is a lot of work. What do you think the hardest thing for you to learn, whether it be in business or personally as a result of business, that you had to learn in order for you to be to the place that you are right now in success?
I'll give you a functional answer and an emotional one, or a mental one.
Sure.
The functional one was, I mean, on paper, I knew about this, but I didn't realize that when you go from being an employee in a corporate environment where there's lots of functions, which basically means there's lots of support, right? You do your bit, but then someone else takes it and moves it down the chain.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden you're on your own, you've just inherited, those 9 other jobs as well, right? You have to be your own market researcher, your own salesperson, your own assistant, your own CEO, your own CFO, your own supply chain manager. You've inherited all these jobs, which you knew they existed on paper, but when you were in that environment, you didn't have to worry about them, right? You trusted that the rest of the system would carry your piece on down the line. And now all of a sudden it all just comes literally heaving down on you.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have the technical skills, which means somehow you rapidly have to, learn as much as you can, as quickly as you can, not to expert level, but to a functional level. And then there's also just the mere sort of emotional weight of having to realize that you don't know everything. You somehow have to upskill yourself within a reasonable amount of time, right? You can't take 10 years to learn each one of these jobs,
Yeah.
to become functional, because you won't survive. And it creates quite a lot of mental stress, and sometimes even physical stress, because it becomes physically manifested, all this amount of energy and work that you have to take care of. Now the other point I was going to make, to your point, is even if you go through that transition, or you muddle through, because at some point we're all just muddling through to the next stage, the point is you need to be able to understand what it all means. Because again, we go back to that reevaluation, the feedback loop exercise. Even as you upskill yourself or you muddle across, does that make your new identity one that you're still comfortable with? So do you want to be the person that, yes, you might have the solution to some problem, but do you want to be doing salesy kind of stuff? Do you want to be doing creative kind of stuff?
Yeah.
You have to, because you're on your own, or maybe there's you and a partner, and between you split some of the workload. But do they play to your strengths? Do they play to your likenesses? Or is everything kind of, well, I know I have to do it, I'm forced to do it, so I do it, but my passion area is something else? And by being steeped in that constant requirement of all these other functions, your original spark, your original spirit starts to get diminished, because you just don't have time for it. You don't have space for it. You don't have mental capacity for it anymore, because it's being overwhelmed by everything else.
I love that you said that, because, and now I feel like this whole podcast is specifically for me now. I'm sure you're speaking to the audience members. And honestly, if I feel it, I'm sure other listeners will as well. But all week long, there's been a theme of, do I really want to take on the CEO role as we're moving forward as the founder? Or do I want to take the step back that I originally planned to stay in the research, right? Because right now I'm just being the founder. And I'm comfortable with that, because I know that I've kind of been teetering on making that decision. And this week I pretty much decided, no, I really don't want to. I'm not good at it. I don't like it. I don't enjoy it. But science, that's my jam. And I feel like not only myself, but a lot of the individuals that I know, when we feel pressured to do all of the things it definitely takes the joy out of it. It takes our creativity out of it. So we can't be in the flow. And we really can hurt the business, ourselves, and our whole team if we stay in a position that we don't thrive in because we feel like we can do that too. Right? Instead of just
So
saying, no, I really don't want to.
as it, without adding yet another obstacle to the journey, at least from the interactions that I've had all these years, I've concluded that a business, again, it doesn't matter the size, but a business to function requires three profiles. You need the CEO, the visionary. You need the CPO or CTO, the person that builds the thing, the tech builder, the product builder. And you need the COO, the chief operations officer, so the person that gets stuff done. So somebody comes up with the dream, the other one builds the dream, and the other one makes sure the dream gets out into the world. Now, if you're the person that, like you said for yourself, if you're the person that's built the thing, you're the CTO or the chief design officer, chief product officer, you have a very clear role. And you also can sort of see what your progression is. I built version 1, now I'm going to build version 2, now I'm going to build version 10. But the business can't just live in the product space. It needs someone to execute it. And it also needs someone above both of those roles, not above in terms of hierarchy, just above in terms of sort of the overall vision, the overall visibility of things, to say, yeah, I know where to take this, who to talk to, how to place it, how to pitch it, and use these two other roles to reinforce that idea. One thing that I've seen as in terms of stumbling blocks is when CTOs naturally assume that because they were the one that came up with the idea and the solution,
Yeah.
they should also by default be the CEO.
Right.
Sometimes yes, most of the time, at least in my experience, no, because it very much is two different skill sets. But beyond that, it's also, I'll use your word, it's two different energies and two different mindsets, because the CEO by default has to be outgoing, salesy, has to be able to connect with people, find the sparks in the in the natural everyday environment, and read a newspaper and then go online and say, I read this article, this is how it relates to what we're doing. The CTO person would only do that if there's a very clear story in the science part of the journal or the tech part of the journal, and say, yes, so they're talking about AI and I'm building AI and this is how technically these two things match. Whereas the CEO will say, you know what, there was a hurricane somewhere and we're actually building something which it might not have to do with hurricanes, but I take the vision and the idea of a hurricane being the cyclone of unmanageable and uncontrollable energy, and you know what, this is what we're doing in our journey, why don't you come and join us, right? They can spin it into something that is still relevant for the business. And then you have the CEO who's saying, listen, Mr. Dreamer and Mrs. Builder, you guys are doing your own thing, but I'm the one getting shit done. So I have my program, I have my milestones, I have my gates, and you guys had better sure you give me what I need when I need it. So the store stocks it, the buyer sees it, the advertising is out when it needs to be, et cetera, et cetera. So you need these three profiles. And I wish I could say it about myself, but I definitely cannot do all three profiles. I have yet to find a founder or sometimes even entire businesses that have all of these three profiles. They might have them in name, but not in function. Because you need these three complementary identities to build one solid solution, whatever that solution is in whatever space it is.
Right. And what you're saying to me, I hear know thyself. And if you truly know yourself and you let your team know themselves, then you guys are all more collaborative and making sure people are in the seats that they really need to be, instead of making them do a job that they really don't enjoy. Because if not, they're not in their actual authentic seat, they're not going to be happy.
I would add one small addendum to that. It's know thyself, but also know the others and make sure they know you. And the reason I added that piece is because as a business develops, a brand develops, the product, the innovation develops, again, there should be that constant iterative feedback loop, right? Yes, we built version 1. Now we're doing version 1.1. So it's a small incremental step. It's not a game-changing evolution, but there's still a difference. At that difference level, are those three people, those three profiles, are they still aligned with the product and the solution and where the business is going? Because maybe they were aligned 100% each with version 1, but
Mm.
maybe the CTO pushed it in a certain direction. So now they're 110% aligned, but the CEO and the COO are, I don't know, 50% and 60% aligned. At that point, the company is still functional. But what happens when we get to 1.2?
Yeah.
And it goes off in a completely different tangent. If that iterative loop isn't built into the structure, the operating structure of the business, at some point you have founders dropping out,
Yep.
founders pulling out, and if they've started getting investments from shareholders and stuff, you create all kinds of negative ripple effects because the shareholders very early on, sorry, the shareholders, the investors, the investment team or the VC funds, they're not investing very early on in the product. They're investing in the team and the promise that team delivers. They're seeing the one or two or three, hopefully three of you, and saying, we see your potential. We understand where you're trying to go, but we've assessed the three of you as individuals on your capabilities and your vision. So we will get you to the next stage. But if in the next stage, the three of you don't continue to be a unit, don't continue to understand if you're still aligned with where you're going and if you're still aligned with each other, at some point, there'll be the corporate divorce, the startup divorce. And even if the investors bring in, a replacement CTO, a replacement CEO, a replacement whatever, there's a fracture, there's a fundamental fracture in that foundation. And that's very hard to recover from. It has happened, but it's very difficult.
I bet. And as the team changes, looking at the business, how it's affecting the business, and then looking at the business, how it affects your changes within yourself, like you're talking about, knowing that that feedback loop is happening, whether we like it or not from the beginning, and accepting that, I think would be a huge eye opener for a lot of founders. I really appreciate you sharing that. Before we hop off today, though, is there something that you intentionally do on a regular basis to either keep you grounded, keep you aware, keep you in touch with that feedback loop, kind of like a tool that you could give the audience?
Um, Not a tool per se, but maybe kind of a mini process. I obviously have my, let's say, subject matter proclivities, like things that I'm very passionate about. So I could watch for hours, read for hours, etc. But what I like to do is, I'll walk into a bookstore or a news agent or something, and I will, on purpose, buy a book or pick up a magazine or a newspaper that has very clearly topic areas that I would never read, I would never leaf through, right? So I might pick up an architecture magazine. I mean, I like architecture overall, but I wouldn't read through a magazine. But I will force myself to read once a year one or two architecture magazines, one or two random fashion magazines, one or two, even wedding planning magazines. It doesn't matter because I am forcing my mind to be exposed to things that it wouldn't normally cognitively disassociate itself from and ignore, even if it's in front of me, because I'm forcing it. I'm putting it in front of my mind and saying, just read it, just look at it, just process the images, even if it's subconscious. And then that somehow comes out later, comes out in an idea, which I don't know where it came from initially, but then when I start to develop it, I'm like, I saw this and I read that and I watched this, and they had nothing to do with what I do, but that's where the magic comes in, because your brain is seeking stimulus.
Yeah.
And I mean, we know about cognitive dissociation. If you only feed it with things that it's comfortable with, all you're doing is reinforcing it to ignore everything else. So on a very tactical basis, again, it's not a tool, it's just a process. On a very tactical basis, I force my brain, I expose my brain to things that have absolutely nothing to do with the day-to-day stuff that I'm doing.
I absolutely love that you do that, because what you're doing is you're challenging neuroplasticity, making sure it's more pliable. I love that. And I really appreciate the guidance that you actually gave me today. I'm sure it's going to be very valuable to the audience. And I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacqueline.